Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking Famous People. More importantly, Eric Strauss, future President of the United States of America. I'm running for President in 2020. I'm working on my platform, polishing it up for public consumption. But I started my display of the platform to the public via my plan for tax reform, which involves the launching of a formal U.S. cryptocurrency that has a tax built into it as part of its architecture. I've been chatting here with Jacob for some time about it, and he's been doing his best to find ways in which it's not going to work, or reasons to critique it, or ways to negate it, which I greatly appreciate. If you are a viewer who thinks maybe host Eric will be the best president, or maybe Eric's plan is a good idea, or who thinks Eric's plan won't work, or whatever you think, I would love to hear from you in either the chat or in the room here, peer.in/TWFP2. You can come talk to me directly on camera or mic. You can type things here in the chat, or you can type things in the chat for the live stream. And I will be happy to answer any questions regarding my tax reform plan or any other policy matter if anybody were to pose some. I'm going to take a second here to get myself slightly better organized so I can have the live chat in front of me, which is right here, I guess. And then I will begin by discussing a bit of my platform and policy prescriptions for the country, why I believe you ought to support me for president, and why I believe I make the best president in the interim while waiting for any questions or critiques from outside parties. So, as I indicated, my name's Eric Strauss. I'm running for president in 2020. Who I am, professionally, I'm an educator. I was an English teacher for a while, but I really came into my own as an educator when I began coaching competitive debate. I usually coach middle schoolers and high schoolers, sometimes elementary schoolers, and sometimes even adults. But that's where I attained my most success, both as an educator and just generally as a professional, because it's zero sum. Like any sport, if you are a very good coach, you win a lot more than you lose. And mathematically, there are only so many good coaches, because in order to win, somebody else has to lose. So I learned about how to attain educational outcomes. I learned what it meant to work against an outcome-defined metric with debate. As a debate coach, it doesn't matter what I did. My kids didn't learn enough if they understand the topic less well than their opponents, or simply lose the round. If my kids lose, I did something wrong, or I didn't do something well enough, or it's part of the process early in the stages. If I want to be considered a good debate coach, my kids need to win substantially more than the norm or the average. I need to be better than my competition. So that's where I achieved my first genuine success professionally, is when I became a debate coach, because it was the first time where I had a genuine metric to measure my success. I do have that professional success as part of the background that I bring to this run for the presidency. Additionally, I have functioned as the director of among the most successful middle school debate programs in the country. Probably top 3, definitely top 5, some of the years top 2. I directed that program. I was an employee of the owner, and everybody else in the company was underneath me. So, in that capacity as a manager, I know how to direct a staff of people. I know how to run a business. I know how to be efficient and construct protocols and follow protocols in ways that produce desirable results. When I came into the picture, that school didn't have an identity, had no students, and was looking for some sort of speech coach to come help them construct a class or two they could sell. By the time I left there, they had a massive program architecture, multiple staff in multiple locations, a branch in Shanghai, and arguably the best middle school team in the country. A massive squad. We had winners in all of the debate events, speech events, etc. So in that capacity, I understand the role of manager that's implicit in the presidency, the role of administrator. Lastly, when I left that job, I started my own business, Autonomy Debate School. Thus, I understand also the role of executive as the owner of a business. I understand the need to plan, the need to concern oneself about the long-term viability of organizational structures. So, as an individual human being with his own life experience, my professional experience is such that it's consistent with the job of executive. Now, you might say the presidency, Eric, is a much more substantial executive role than any that you've just described. That is true. However, I will point out that experience as an executive correlates very poorly with success as president. Donald Trump, for example, has been an executive his whole life, and he doesn't know how to be the president because being president is not the same thing as owning a company, is not the same thing as being a director in a company, it's not the same thing as being a coach of a team, it's not the same thing as being a teacher of a classroom. It's none of those things. Being president requires you to be a complete human being who has a metaframe that explains why the country should do what it should do, what the country should do, how the president should interact with the nation and the other branches of the government in implementing this vision, how the president ought to attain agreement about this vision, what it means to be a good president in terms of adherence to constitutional limitations, how the president ought to manage the jurisprudence aspect of things, namely the attorney general and court appointees, in order to help shape the jurisprudence future of the country. The president needs to additionally be a general, the leader of the military. So that's a different capacity. All of these things require then an individual who doesn't have any particular specific background. They require somebody who is able to bring into consideration in executing the job every possible imaginable frame of reference. Would be ideal. Here's what I plan to do as your president of the United States. I wish to bridge all competing interests in this country by acknowledging the legitimacy of, articulating the specifics of, and crafting legislation by considering the role of the multiple legitimizing methodologies that people use. There are some of us in this country who judge the legitimacy of a law based on its consistency with the Constitution. And I want to make sure that the action of the federal government meets the adjudicatory standards of those people. There are others who adjudicate the question of legitimacy by looking at effectiveness or concrete impacts that we can measure that move us closer to the purported goal of that legislation. I want to make sure that whatever government action is taken is consistent with that metric as well. Sometimes those two metrics conflict. What I want to do is provide the bridge there and say, let's find methodologies to attain outcomes in which these things don't conflict. The fact that these legitimizing metrics do conflict tells me right away that this is not an optimal way to do this. I also want to consider legitimization metrics that consider the social impact. In other words, it's important that legislation that's undertaken not position itself as a victory for one side and a defeat for the other side. Partisanship, makes it such that we just take turns making bad decisions. To be truly nonpartisan means to take into account the partisan impulses of most parties involved in this process and to find solutions that bypass ways in which one party or the other claims victory and confers defeat upon the other party. Okay, so with all people's focus on what's contemporarily cool, how do you move around people's lack of care for the policies you want to implement? Okay, well, I don't blame the population as a whole for being politically apathetic, for being disillusioned in their capacity to affect political change, and feeling as though they keep getting seduced and then wham bam thank you ma'am. This is what Obama did, for example. He came to the populace and said, I want your idealism. I want you to once again suspend your disbelief, your scrutiny, and trust that this time this individual is going to bring real reform, real change, a real vision for America, that we're going to bridge the differences between people, all that hopey changey stuff, right? I'm not promising you hopey changey shit. I don't care about hopey changey shit. I'm promising you that I won't promise you anything except to be the person who's capable of figuring out how to manage these disputes in a way in which all parties feel as though their interests have been attended to, and in which the actual problem is provides real solvency. Okay, so Sean Murray Rothbard asked a very important question. Host Eric Strauss, future President Eric, what is your policy around penises? My policy around penises is the same as my policy around vaginas. That is to say, the policy prescription
what is good for the goose is not good for the gander.
My policy prescriptions are unchanging regardless of the vicinity of penises or vaginas. Now, if Sean Murray Rothbard actually meant, what is your policy regarding penises or towards penises? I have no policy towards penises except to say that the federal government has no legitimate jurisdiction over your penis, except insofar as you use it to transgress against others in a way that renders it a federal matter, which seems, it's hard for me to think of an example of that, but I'm sure there is. In that case, yes, I support federal policy around penis. That is to say, I oppose transgression regardless of the body part you use to transgress. Thank you for the question, Sean Murray Rothbard.
Have you cleaned your room yet?
I am cleaning the metaphysical room in the nation right now, my dear.
Have you cleaned your physical surrounding room?
I have not, as you can observe. That does not mean that I don't affirm my duty to do so on behalf of the increasing the likelihood of becoming president, because I accept my moral obligation to make my best effort to become president, because I fully affirm and have no choice but to, given the fact that this is the strongest argument regarding the matter, I fully affirm that I genuinely am the most qualified and probably only fully qualified person to be president of the United States.
Now quit twiddling your penis.
Sean Murray Rothbard points out, so you want to stuff my penis with a tampon? No, Sean, you've misinterpreted my comments. But thank you for engaging me anyway. And WTF, I think that F stands for a dirty word, Sean. Here in the Presidential Politics Live Chat, we don't do that kind of stuff, okay? We take public policy very seriously. Kimberly, are you supporting my run for presidency? Are you going to endorse me as a candidate? Are you going to endorse one? I am. Are you going to endorse one of my opponents?
Well, if you're running for president and you're on that ballot, of course I'm going to vote for you.
Okay, so Kurt Dog asks about my policy regarding gun laws and gun control. So my policy regarding that is quite simple. I agree with the side that says we should take actions as a government and a legislative body that do successfully reduce instances of gun violence, provided those means exist. As a government, as a federal government, we are constrained by the Constitution, and as federal courts, the judges are there to interpret the Second Amendment in ways that are consistent with the words that it says, and with the realities of the status quo, and with the preferences of the individual states and people. However, the problem is this. For those who want stricter gun laws, I would ask you to give me some indication that a gun law can produce solvency. Thus far, every gun law that's been passed has not changed the next status quo, which is, we haven't prevented gun violence. So if we have hundreds of gun laws on the federal books, what I am saying is, if you want to prevent gun violence,
And what about water?
advocate something that might prevent gun violence. Gun control laws don't do that. We know that. If they did, why is this gun control law going to prevent gun violence when none of the former hundreds of them did? What is the distinction that makes this gun law likely to behave differently than the former ones? If you want to argue about gun laws, fine. I don't want to argue about the Second Amendment. I support it. I think that's a good enough reason to prevent the federal government from passing gun legislation. I think that the ability of states to pass gun legislation is absolutely adequate in terms of preserving society's ability to regulate that sort of thing. But that's not the reason we need to oppose gun laws. What I'm saying is, what do you want? You want a reduction in gun violence. What you are proposing, no matter how vigorously we were to pass it, will not produce the outcome you want. So why should we do what you suggest? I'm going to answer this next question. Have you decided on a vice president? I haven't. I'm aware of the need to pick one. I'm considering talking and would like to talk to Damon Gray, former Chad Crandall, as a potential running mate, or at the very least as somebody who might be interested in endorsing me and facilitating my successful attainment of the presidency. I know his politics and mine are similar. I know he's a fellow meta-rational, which is to say, he's capable of acknowledging and conceding when he's wrong, which is critically important, and is not the case in the current administration, obviously. It's true, Sean Murray Rothbard, Kimberly is not treating Eric's campaign for presidency with a regular seriousness. But it's actually only sort of true. I get the sense in Kimberly that increasingly she's getting worried, which means she's starting to believe me. She didn't believe me at first, and that's understandable. As an HP, I tend to launch a lot of things and only actually follow through on some of them. This is one that I sort of jokingly launched quite a while ago. When 2 days ago I genuinely launched it, everything fell into place. This is my destiny. This enables everything I need to do and gives me adequate justification to do it. This puts to use my vast amounts of knowledge regarding public policy, and it enables me to meaningfully make statements about ideas rather than just in some hypothetical argumentational world. I keep telling everybody that my ideas are the best because they win all the arguments. This enables me to say, my ideas are the best, so let's put them into practice. Kimberly is worried, not annoyed. That may display as annoy, but she's got good cause to worry. She's beginning to think, well, what if he actually does this and wins the presidency? She's got very good cause to worry. I am actually doing it. I am actually going to win. And as I've articulated these reasons many times in the past, I've got extraordinarily good reason to think this is true. I'm actually going to do this because I can tell in my own self when something is for reals. I'm already committing too much personal authenticity capital, too much trust to back out of this. But that's not why I'm sure I'm going to do it. It's because making this decision opened up a whole new levels of self-optimization that are not accessible to me if I don't do this. I am forced to be serious now. I can't, this is something big enough that I can't not take it seriously. It's something significant enough that it deserves nothing less than my earnest, full attention, without any self-considerations as far as ego, without any needing to win a battle for my own purposes. The very fate of the world is determined by how the immediate future defines the medium-term future. I'm the best and most viable chance, not just the United States, but the entire world has, to help us clear away shit from the past into the future that otherwise would necessarily kill a bunch of us. I will help clear that away by changing the nature of the discourse that people are engaged in about the role of the citizen and the agent of governance and their interactions with each other in the contemporary world. The world we live in is no longer the world in which government grew up, was nourished, and had its purpose and has legitimacy. That world has dramatically changed. The government needs to adapt as a species in that ecosystem, or else it will do two things. It will die, and it will take a shit ton of us with it. I agree, Sean Murray Rothbard. That is one of the outcomes that will occur when I am president. I will return dignity to the office. I will respect the office and display and talk about what it means to respect the office, what it means to be a respectful and respectable member of the federal government team. The federal governance team is tasked with and needs to limit its attention to a precise set of concerns. It is the manager, the administrator of interstate interaction. These 50 states that comprise the Union are intended to be 50 independent sovereign states. The federal government is intended to be the manager of those 50 separate sovereign states, equal in power and dignity. It's intended to maintain that equality in power and dignity and to ensure that the states interact with each other fairly. I believe there are additional roles for the federal government that can be inferred from the Constitution or that ought to be taken on despite their non-constitutional nature, such as I believe in the incorporation doctrine of SCOTUS, which says that the Bill of Rights is not merely a prescription upon the federal government from violating those rights or passing any laws that run afoul of those, that prescription on government action ought be conferred down onto the state governments. That's the incorporation doctrine of the Supreme Court of the United States. I agree with that interpretation. I agree the Bill of Rights is not merely a conscription upon the federal government, but a positive assertion of negative rights for individual human beings and a protection of the sovereignty of the state government that allows them to pass different areas of legislation, but is still constrained in the same regard by the negative rights of the citizens. That's what the incorporation doctrine of SCOTUS ought to be interpreted to mean in regards to how the Bill of Rights applies to citizens of the states rather than citizens of the federal government. So there's a way in which I believe the federal government has a role in protecting citizens from their state governments that I would like to see it maximized. I also believe that the federal government is appropriately jurisdictional when it engages in environmental protection in certain ways and absolutely not when it engages in other ways. So I would love to see an improvement of our national park system. I would love to see existing open spaces preserved as such, as many of them as possible. I would love to see environmental regulation that matters enforced all the time. And I would love to see shit like I read about the other day never happen. So what I'm talking about now is here in California, this has nothing to do with federal government, but equivalents do sometimes occur. There was an instance where a nursery growing a bunch of citrus trees found itself in between two 5-mile circles that comprised quarantine regions because citrus trees in those regions, at least one of them, had been found with a certain instance of an Asian invasive species that transfers a rot kind of disease between citrus trees. California agriculture department people up in Sacramento in California are very concerned about any kind of blight that affects the California's agricultural produce economy naturally. So they've attempted to prevent damage to the citrus economy by quarantining trees in these circles. Here's the problem. The story I read, it talked about a family nursery that was between the two 5-mile circles. So they said, you can't quarantine us. We're not in these 5-mile circles, and none of our trees have any examples of these bugs. And the state said, well, we're going to quarantine you anyway. So the nursery took the state to court. Before that case was heard, the state agency changed the rules so that two 5-mile circles that have a small distance between them become one 11-mile circle. They changed the rule. The court ruled in favor of the nursery but said it's moot because the new rule still applies to you and now you still can't move those trees. So while they cheated and you could have moved those trees when you wanted to, it doesn't matter. You couldn't have moved those trees because the state prevented you from doing it. But now, in retrospect, this court is saying you should have been able to move those trees, but you still can't now because the state changed the rules while I was deciding whether you should have been able to move those trees. Okay, so the state changed the rules. They weren't able to move the trees. The state told them, what you have to do is build this structure around the trees to prevent them from getting infected by these bugs and keep that structure up for 2 years. But, of course, the nursery had been fighting this court battle. In the process of fighting the battle, they had been having their trees sprayed with insecticide to prevent any infection by these bugs. And at the point after the trial had been decided and they were told they can't move the trees, none of those trees had still yet been affected by any bugs. And the thing is, since they knew none of the trees were infected by bugs, it is very conceivable that they could move them out of the quarantine area without them getting infected by bugs during the process of the move. All they'd have to do is move them inside a closed truck, for example. But the state of California prevented them from doing so on the grounds that because they're in the quarantine area, there's a chance they might be infected in the process of leaving the quarantine area. And what ended up happening is the $1 million worth of citrus trees that this family owned that were perfectly healthy ended up being killed because the cost of conforming to the environmental regulations was greater than the value of the trees. The EPA should never, ever, ever do anything like that. We must, as a nation, respect the individual citizen's rights foremost, except when the application of those rights poses a serious and direct harm to the environment, not a threat. Not a threat. The fact that the trees potentially could have been infected is irrelevant when you know somebody is in a quarantined area, is currently not infected, and you can move them out of the quarantine area and then confirm they're still not infected, there should be absolutely no reason to force that person or those trees or anybody else to stay within the quarantine area. We have to be reasonable about things. So I do have strong feelings about environmental protection, for example. I don't know about who Tucker Carlson is. How will you handle the TV commercial your opponent runs of a video where you break your finger and your butthole? I will say, friends, hopefully you've all seen the commercial my opponent is running. It shows me, an average American citizen, doing something dumb. I'm scratching my ass while driving the car and I break my finger. If you want the right president of these United States, you want to vote for the guy who, like any other human being, does stupid shit occasionally. Because the fact that my opponent is positioning himself as somehow more reliable for his absence of stupid shit just means you know for a fact he's lying to you. I can explain to you why he's lying. First of all, note that he's a moron, and here's why. He's already presented some of his policy plans in his so-called platform, and here's how none of them make sense. Contrast them against mine here that do make sense. So we know he's not a smart person. Therefore, he has certainly done dumb things himself. He's walked into a glass door. He stubbed his toe on his other foot and broke it or something. He's done stupid shit too. But unlike me, he's not selling you what you're going to get. He's trying to position what you're going to get as something other than it is. He's not less prone to that sort of stuff than me. He's obviously much more prone to it. He's not less likely to make mistakes. He's obviously much more likely to make them. After all, he's making one right now and lying to the American people. That's not a palindrome. I keep hearing that from a lot of people. The implicit question, are you really serious, Eric? Yes, I am absolutely really serious. Perhaps for the first time in my life. I've never been so serious about anything. When I made the real decision to run for president, it occurred to me, oh my God, this is the thing that unleashes who I am. It says, okay, Eric, it's time to stop playing debate. You've been playing debate for 40 years. You know all the arguments. You know what all the answers are. You get nothing anymore from winning against somebody who disagrees about that. It is time to do your patriotic duty. Another reason why I'm uniquely the right person to be president is the way my father raised me. I am absolutely a patriot. I care a great deal about the way the American democracy expresses itself. I was raised to believe that the Supreme Court comprised the body of justice that was on the side of the people, that they protected us from constitutional excesses attempted by the federal government. The Supreme Court has broken my father's heart over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. And it's broken my heart as well. We have been given, as a people, by our forefathers, the greatest system ever devised by a people to govern themselves. The only way we don't end up realizing this vision of a great nation that is self-determined and self-evaluatory is if we allow anybody to convince us that there are elites out there whose judgment is superior, that there are the authorities who know what ought to be, while the rest of us need to sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm telling you, you should sit down, shut up, and listen to me, because I am the only person that I've ever encountered who actually deserves to be called an authority, or who has adequate restraint and humility. May sound contradictory. I'm the only person humble enough to be president. Everybody else is convinced that their vision is so clear that it justifies them doing shit that's not okay. I'm convinced my vision is so clear because I'm not trying to justify shit that's not okay. Everybody else is convinced their vision is clear enough that it makes it okay for them to deceive you about who they are just to get elected, because, after all, once they get elected, their rightness will help everybody. I'm not trying to tell you that. I'm saying I'm so actually correct, and so certain that I am actually correct, and so certain that I'm correct mostly about being the best person to determine how to do things. Not that my ideologies are correct, but that I'm the only person who can both transcend those ideologies and retain a principled approach to the office. That most people who are principled are attached to the legitimacy of a limiting principle. Most people who are attached to outcomes refuse to adhere to a limiting principle in a way that preserves the dignity and legitimacy of the law. I afford both. I both am actually principled and will do my best to ascribe and uphold to the limiting principle that defines the U.S. presidency and the Constitution of the United States. And at the same time, I am also a pragmatist. And I understand that it is necessary to deal with the world as it is. Sometimes the world as it is deviates so far from the world as it ought to be according to limiting principles that to attempt to apply that limiting principle in that circumstance is to attempt a bone to be the right shape and straightness when it's been broken and bent for years. It's going to take some time to shape it back out. You don't just go, oh, well, let's just force it into place. That's not a good idea. So I'm aware of that. I'm also aware of the fact that while competing interests may not be a good way to adjudicate constitutional issues, and I don't believe it is, I think we need to have a principled approach to determining the binary status of a constitutional issue. Well, that may not be how we ought to determine constitutional issues. It is also the case that as president, if I am going to successfully produce a course of action that does everything it ought to in an ideal world, it will be constitutionally consistent. It will be consistent with outcomes and outcome calculus. It will adhere to basic limiting principles and every other metric that we needed to do. I'm the person who can do that, who can say, okay, I'm not married to my ideology, but I'm principled. Can I find a way to bypass harms to any party in this? Can I find a way to make a solution that upholds all evaluatory metrics? No, for the first time in my life, proposing to Kimberly is self-serving. Entirely self-serving. I need to be in a relationship. I love Kimberly. Kimberly's a good woman for me. I want her to marry me. I want to lock that shit down. Does it help me to be a better person? Yeah. Does it help me to be a more realized Eric? Yeah. But for the first time in my life, the only thing I've ever done in my life that I wholly believe in debate as a paradigm for helping other individuals become fully actualized. So I believe in that paradigm. But for the first time in my life, do I believe that the relationship between my course of action as being the right course of action and me being the right agent to pursue it renders this thing that I'm doing as my one true destiny and the one true actual way in which I need to turn everything that I've been practicing for 40 years into meaningful action. Okay, let me ask you. I skipped stuff. Oh, the butthole question? No, I answered that one. I explained why you ought to prefer the guy who broke his finger scratching his ass in the car. And why the fact that he's using that as a critique of me means you shouldn't vote for him. But the fact that he's critiquing me on that is not an indication that he doesn't do stupid shit. It's an indication that he lies to you and positions things to you as relevant that aren't relevant, and positions things to you as though he's not guilty of them when he obviously does many more examples of things like breaking his finger, scratching his ass than I do, because he's obviously done so here in critiquing that behavior. That's a huge mistake. Why? It's not relevant. So he's not very smart. So he's likely to do dumbass shit way more than me. Kurt Dog, I agree with you. Stepping in shit is the fast way to get where you want to go. But when you get there, you end up tracking shit all over the place. So it may be the fast way to attain the presidency is to side with one group, demonize another, and rile up the base and whatever else. I'm not going to do that. I intend to be a non-partisan representative of the American people, as the office of the presidency should be. How do I feel about Guantanamo Bay? I mean, why do we have a military base there? It's not by consent of Cuba, and it's not our country. Number two, if we must have a military base there, okay, but the fact that a military base isn't on American soil, in my mind, does not justify any sort of escape from constitutional constrictions upon the military. So it's not okay to torture people on a military base in the United States, and it's not okay to torture people in a U.S. facility of any sort by U.S. people of any sort anywhere in the world ever on any occasion for any reason. So to the extent that that's occurring in Guantanamo Bay, that behavior, torture, needs to stop. To the extent that we have indefinite detentions of people who haven't been convicted of any crime, those individuals, whether they're U.S. citizens or not, deserve habeas corpus rights in this context because the whole thing is bullshit. So I want those people who are suffering indefinite detentions to have their habeas corpus rights. The Justice Department, under a Strauss administration, will no longer be arguing in favor of getting away with bullshit. We're not going to be defending the government position that those people don't have habeas corpus rights. We're going to be arguing against the former government position and saying, we, the prosecution that formally came to you, courts, to say, can we please keep these guys in Guantanamo Bay? We are now coming to you saying, can you please rule that our keeping these guys in Guantanamo Bay is absolutely unconstitutional, reprehensible, appalling, and never okay under U.S. policy and law? So the Justice Department is going to execute the vision of this administration, is going to have a substantial role in executing that vision. We are going to be at the courts all the time. And we are no longer going to be advocating in favor of let's have the federal government have more power to exploit, more power to harm, more power to abuse the Constitution. We're going to be arguing the exact opposite. I have to keep a big army, Red Queen race. I don't know what Red Queen race means, but I don't think we need a big standing army. In fact, I think we don't need a standing army at all. We have a standing Navy. We should have one, and I don't plan to dismantle that. I don't plan to dismantle the armed forces either. But it's not a priority for me, but to the extent that we can, I would love to lower spending on defense. I'd like to reduce the size of our standing military in terms of actual foot soldiers. We don't need very many foot soldiers. We won't need any foot soldiers in my administration because we're not going overseas to attack anybody. We're not going to bomb anybody, and we're not going to shoot anybody. If they attack us, of course. I'm not a pacifist. I absolutely believe the natural consequence of somebody using physical force against America or Americans is that America responds with equivalent force or greater in order to ensure both that the person is punished for their bad behavior, the party responsible is punished for their bad behavior, and to ensure that future parties who might consider such a course of action realize that it will be responded to with immediate, swift, and overwhelming force. However, unless we are attacked, I'm not going to be a president who okays, justifies, permits, tacitly or otherwise, acts of murder committed by individuals in the name of the United States of America. If we don't have a moral, legal, and causal justification to kill somebody, we won't be killing them. What's Red Queen race? I don't know what that means. So, I think it's I want to address this thing again from Jacob. He says, not sure whether this is serious or not. I am hearing a lot of this in his first few days after I started taking it seriously. It is the most serious thing I've ever done. There's nothing I will ever do that's as important as this again. I will successfully attain the presidency. If I don't successfully attain it in 2020, I will in 2024.
What are you doing today that demonstrates your seriousness of running for president of the United States?
Well, I'm articulating the specifics of my policy platform, for one thing, and I'm explaining precisely why any alternative to electing me as president is necessarily worse. So today what I'm doing is I've already worked more on my platform. I've made this video in which I'm hoping to have people engage me about my tax reform plan, which is an example of the sort of brilliant solution that avoids harms that solutions normally bring to play, that I plan to utilize as president to actually affect solvency, actually create solvency while bypassing partisan difficulties, while maximizing permanence so that I don't have to worry about what future bodies of legislation are going to do. I know that the goods that I've attained, or the positives for America I've attained, won't be destroyed by the tendency of government to always get its fingers into everything. Okay, so it's a good pausing spot here. We're going to take a breath and recap for those who are just joining us. If you're just joining this live stream, or if you're watching it later when it's recorded, it's specifically and expressly about my tax reform plan and how that's going to both save Social Security, increase tax revenue for the United States, be the only alternative to the naturally occurring other eventual phenomenon, which is people simply avoiding all tax liability by using cryptocurrencies that don't help the United States federal government, and explaining how it's the most feasible tax reform plan because it doesn't actually require any legislative action, that I could do it even if the only mechanism I had was my legitimate use of the bully pulpit, as they say. In other words, that the only thing I actually did was sell the idea of people mining crypto USD and head the private group that sets it all up, and to ensure that none of the architecture is designed to personally benefit anybody. So it's got to be structured right. My private group can structure it, launch it. Me as president of Bully Pulpit can sell it to the American people, and I will personally be responsible to make sure that the architecture is not structured in any way to help me or anybody close to me. That in no way, shape, or form is this small group have any advantage in the initial launch period. I also want to make sure it's structured in such a way that it's slower than most cryptocurrencies, so that being an early adopter doesn't give you as huge an advantage as it normally does. And I want to make sure that before it actually launches, everybody in America, at least, is well aware of it. It would be nice if everybody in the world were aware of it too, because remember, every application of a transfer of wealth in that currency attains a 4% tax for the U.S. federal government, regardless if the transaction is conducted by a U.S. citizen or not, regardless if it's conducted within the U.S. boundaries or not, regardless of anything. So there's lots of reasons why this plan is brilliant. And among the most important of them are the fact that it requires nobody to concede anything. We don't have to make any changes to the existing tax code. We don't have to try to deny Congress tax power. We don't have to do anything like that. We just implement this thing with or without the agreement of the rest of the government, and it will solve our problems for us inevitably and naturally by maintaining a just ecosystem of economy. A just economic system will always be preferable to everybody if they can access it with equal ease. The solution to injustice is provide a just alternative. Okay, so Kurt Dog says, what's a brief overview of tax reform? Which is what I just gave. The big question is, are you going to take money from the rich or the poor? Well, the answer to that is the current system of progressive taxation is a deplorable assault on the poorest, most disadvantaged, most disenfranchised members of society. The reason this is necessarily the case is because if you take any individual who has a fair amount of wealth, then we get to decide how much of that fair amount of wealth is going to be spent on avoiding taxes. There are two answers. In my plan, if they choose to go with the crypto USD, zero. Zero of their wealth will be spent avoiding taxes. 4% of every transaction they engage in where they transfer wealth will be taxed. Will be the tax bit that the government keeps. So then the thing is, okay, now they're paying less total taxes and they're spending no money on reducing their tax burden. The amount of money that currently is spent reducing tax burdens is massive. You can't drive a block down the street in America without seeing a income tax place to help you prepare your income taxes. All of that money is money that is taken from the mouths of the poor, taken from the pockets of the disenfranchised, taken from those who can least afford to give it. The reason we know that's the case is because let's say I paint houses for a living. No poor person will ever hire me to paint their house. It's possible their landlord will hire me to paint the landlord's house on behalf of the poor people who live there. But the fact is, no poor person will ever hire me to paint their house. A rich person has, let's say, $4,000 to spend. In the status quo, they're spending that $4,000 on somebody to help them pay less taxes. So that $4,000 is, instead of going to the federal government, goes to somebody whose job it is to represent you in opposing the federal government as they try to collect taxes from you. That person is not poor, and that person is not disenfranchised. That person receives all of that money that otherwise would go directly to somebody who's earning it for real reasons, like a house painter, or alternately, if there were no tax avoidance costs, that presumably would go to the government itself. This massive amount of wealth in the country that is diverted away from any useful purpose towards the avoidance of existing taxation is just one component of this assault on the poor that progressive taxation represents. It's called progressive in the same way that cancer is called a day in the park. It's not a day in the park. It's quite the opposite of that. Progressive taxation is nothing progressive about it. If you want to talk about something that the dominant elites constructed to serve their own interests at the expense of the poor, I got something real simple for you as the answer to that. Progressive taxation is something dominant elites created to serve their own interests at the expense of the poor. And the brilliance of that plan for progressive taxation is they sell it as the exact opposite of what it is. So they say, why do I keep getting these stabbing pains in my side? Are you stabbing me? They say, no. I'm using this knife to prevent that guy from stabbing you with that big knife over there. Meanwhile, that guy's using that big knife to chop down sugarcane because it's actually a machete, and he's working and creating wealth. That guy's never going to stab you with a machete. And me stabbing you with a little knife over and over again is not a way to serve your interests. That's progressive taxation in a nutshell. If you don't take that money away from the rich person, it will go to an actual person who needs it and who is earning it by doing work. There may be examples of individual rich people who hoard and put away money and save it for a rainy day and it doesn't get back into the economy for years and years and years. If that's the case, that's okay, because prior to creating that wealth, the rich person, it didn't exist in the world anyway, so it's not like they're hoarding wealth that otherwise would go someplace else. They created it. They're just not allowing it to be used in the economy at the moment. But regardless, those individuals represent the vast minority of people. Most people who have wealth like to have wealth because it empowers them to do more stuff. Naturally, every time a wealthy person does something, that money enters the economy. Wealthy people pay people to do shit. So the answer is the most progressive tax is a flat tax on the transfer of wealth. That way, the wealthiest people who have the most wealth transfer and naturally transfer the most wealth pay the vast majority of the taxes. And poor people who don't have much wealth to transfer and therefore don't transfer wealth very often pay very little in taxes. In total taxes. Do they pay the same percentage of their total amount of money that they transfer back and forth? Yes, as is just and appropriate. After all, if you want to have progressivism, then it's already present in the policies that spend that money. The money is taken from everybody, but it's spent disproportionately on the poor. So that's where the progressivism comes in. If we attempt to do progressivism on both ends, we end up with regressivism because, like two negative numbers, they cancel each other out and become a positive. Or vice versa, except it doesn't work the other way around. But the point is, it's like that. So if you're concerned about the poor, if you're concerned about social justice, if you're concerned about progressivism, understand that I bring real progressivism. I bring real concern for each individual person. If you are concerned about a population of individuals who are disenfranchised in this country, I've got good news for you. I refuse to reduce any of those individuals to a member of that population, and I'm concerned about those individuals' ability to express their individual autonomy. I'm concerned about those individuals' ability to make their own decisions and solve problems in a real fashion. I'm concerned about the ability of local communities to meaningfully expend their own resources to solve problems that are specific to them, rather than sending those resources to a central government thousands of miles away and then maybe getting some of it back in some ways that sort of address actual problems that they have sometimes. That's the status quo. I'd like to see that end. We have an upside down pyramid. The most control should be at the local level. The least control should be at the federal government level. And control at the federal government level should be mostly directed at the level of government below them and so forth, rather than having the centralized government have any particular impact on the lives of the individual citizens who ought to be citizens of their respective states. Hi, Nabil Husani. How you doing today? For all of you guys who are here watching this live stream or here in the room, remember, there will be a day not too far in the distant future we're going to say, I was there the second day or third day after host Eric was serious about his presidential campaign, talking with him about his ideas way back in January 2018. And people will be like, no, you weren't. You talked to him January 2018? Yeah, I was on board his presidential campaign then. Why is this going to be such a shocking thing? Because I'm actually going to win the presidency. Maybe not in 2020, but definitely in 2024 if not. And I will actually win it for all the reasons I said. I will keep telling everybody every day as I make more and more videos about this subject. Each day I'm going to produce another policy area video. So today is still coming out later, a video about what the Strauss administration's policy on the war on drugs will be, drug policy, interfacing with DEA, interfacing with FDA, and how we're going to start to tear down some of the massively harmful violence that's necessitated by this horribly ill-advised war on drugs. So, again, though, it's one of those questions where it's my job as president to bridge the various constituencies regarding this issue. It's going to be a challenging one because there are obviously certain sort of reactionary, highly law and order types who feel very strongly that drugs are bad and drug users are criminals and they ought to be punished, and the federal government has a definite vested interest in making sure society doesn't become addicted to drugs, yada, yada, yada. There are a lot of people with that perspective. And my job will be to prevent the harms done in the name of the drug war while concurrently making them feel as though I've attended to their concerns as well. That's going to be a challenge because, frankly, I think such people are, maybe not intentionally, but regardless, manifesting evil. So, this is why it's important to have a president like me who recognizes that he has his own bias against these parties, that recognizes that his job as president is to find ways that all metrics are legitimized by policy whenever possible, and to make sure that he represents the interests of all the American people, not a given political party. Well, I'm getting the money to run right now, Ian P. Thank you for the question. I'm doing it by having this live stream and by encouraging anybody watching it or anybody in the room or anybody who believes not necessarily that I'm going to win, not necessarily in all my ideas, but believes in the idealism of a citizen who's highly informed and who is attempting to represent all the citizens. If you believe that that's an idealistic vision that would be preferable to the current situation, contribute money to my campaign on my GoFundMe page. When I get $5,000, I will tell that to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, and they will consider me an official candidate. Until I raise $5,000, they won't. Am I still an official candidate? Absolutely. I am running for president. I am going to generate that $5,000 soon enough. I'm going to report to the FEC, and then I'll be an official candidate. And I'm going to then, and already I'm setting up a schedule whereby I'm going to go in person to places locally where there's lots of people. Like I'm right next to Laverne College here. I'm going to go speak to people about this. I need a couple of things before I make my first public appearance. I need some campaign signs. I need I need the branding parts a bit. And I have a campaign manager already, Taylor, and we're talking about how we're going to find individuals who are willing to take on some volunteer tasks, like designing a campaign flyer for me or a campaign poster. Like,
hello.
I'm sorry, hold on, I got an audio issue. Let me refresh and fix it.
Nothing will ever be as good as that Obama O thing. That was like perfect. Yeah, Eric, we can't hear you.
Mic check. Okay, friends. If you're still hearing me on the live stream, this is a momentary technical problem, which I should have straightened away. I want to continue live streaming. I want to continue answering questions for anybody who's, I consider it an act of patriotism for any American or non-American even to come and challenge anything I'm saying. I'm not a politician who wants you to agree with me until you are absolutely convinced that you should. I don't know what's going on here. I'm having problems with technical stuff. I guess I'm going to end this live stream as a consequence because I'm not even able to get into the room right now adequately. Thanks for watching. I will make another video later. I plan to engage as often as I can and hopefully have people engage me back. So, okay, then I need to be able to hear you guys. So I'll fix that then. Okay. As an American citizen, you, in my opinion, should feel that for a person to deserve your vote as president, they should be willing and interested in answering your questions, in addressing concerns that are brought up about their policies and their plans. You know, when Trump says Hillary is an awful person or whatever, Hillary didn't respond to any warrants about that. When Hillary said Trump's an awful person or whatever, Trump didn't respond to any warrants about that. You should not be willing to vote for a person, in my opinion, who will not answer the actual arguments made against what they're saying. I promise I will always answer the actual arguments that are being used, and if those arguments are winning arguments, that I will adjust accordingly my position. I won't persist in insisting that a given position is correct when I can't win the argument defending why. You should require your president to adhere to that standard. We should require our presidents to adhere to that standard. We should require our legislators to adhere to that standard. It's the bare minimum that's acceptable. If somebody's telling you, vote for me for president, they're telling you, my vision for America is substantially better enough from anybody else's that I actually deserve to be the one who makes the decisions for all 400 million of you. Make your presidential candidate acknowledge that, acknowledge the significance of it, and tell you how it is that he plans to both represent the interests of the country, represent the interests of 400 million people, and adjudicate the difficulty of competing interests while not being ideologically aligned with any side, while not being tied to any ideology even. Did I say 4 million? I meant 400 million. Yeah, whatever. Something around 400 million. I mean, I guess it does matter, and I don't mean to say 50 million or so Americans somehow don't matter. I'm just saying approximately 400 million. So the campaign manager is here, Taylor, and as I was explaining to others, I received a question about, well, how am I going to raise those funds, or how am I going to make this a serious campaign? And the answer is, I'm trying to raise funds right now. If you're watching the live stream, or if you're in this room, or if you're somewhere else and you hear this later or whatever, go to my GoFundMe page and contribute to my campaign only if one of the things occurs. Either you feel as though you're willing to take a chance on idealism one more time. If you've given money idealistically in the past to a political campaign, I don't blame you for thinking, I'm never going to do that again. Because politicians don't deserve your money by and large. They aren't telling you the truth to get it. They aren't actually trying to enact or realize a grand act of real patriotism. They aren't trying to manifest their destiny as moral agents. They're trying to manifest the pinnacle of their career. Now, obviously, President of the United States would be the best job I've ever had. Not even the second place job wouldn't really be even a close second. President of the United States would be a much more substantially important job than any I'd ever had. And that's the case for every single candidate. It doesn't mean we need to make sure that we pick somebody who's had the most important job prior to this because they're the most qualified to have an important job. We know that's not the case. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State prior to the last election. She was utterly, completely, abjectly unqualified to be president, even though she'd been Secretary of State, even though she'd been First Lady. How do we know she was objectively unqualified to be president? Well, for one thing, she gamed the Democratic Party processes to render the votes of American citizens irrelevant in order to ensure her own victory. So she's already proven that she doesn't care about the interests of the country or the will of the people. How do you know that Trump wasn't a good candidate for president, even though he had plenty of experience being an important executive? because he not only doesn't recognize the legitimacy of those who disagree with him, but he doesn't even seem to get the concept of it, that you could choose to affirm your own position in ways that are constructive, that attempt to provide accommodation to concerns by those who oppose your position, or you could choose to do the opposite. He chooses to do the opposite all the time because he doesn't know how to defend without negating. He doesn't know how to affirm in clever ways that get around objections such that the interests of multiple parties are upheld without sacrificing in principle. He's a million miles from that, because most of the most important qualities to being president you can't learn in any other job. You either learn them because you've attended to personal growth enough and been objectively self-critical enough, you've attained meta-rationalism, which is the state I'm in, which is to say I'm not attached to my beliefs, and yet I have principles, even though it might seem contradictory. That's what we need the president to be able to do. And if you want to be president, you almost for sure cannot do that, because most truly realized people don't want to be president. I do, because it's my destiny. It's my duty as a patriot, and it's my destiny. I was born and raised. I experienced life. I processed ideas. All the stuff that came before now, I now understand, happened for a reason. It happened because I needed to be trained by the world in advance for my destiny as President of the United States. And it's such an important job that I had to endure 40 years of failure before I could even begin to prepare adequately for it, and then take another 4 or 5 years of refining my ideation before the universe would even allow me to realize what I had to do. Until a couple of days ago, I lacked the clarity about myself, the objectivity about myself, to accept that such a thing could be my destiny. I was too egotistical, too attached to displays of humility to accept my destiny. My final stage of personal growth comes through being the hand of goodness, implementing the will of the individual in a way that sustains a community, respects competing interests, understands principle, and attains an honesty that politics normally precludes. Under most normal political atmospheres, it is not possible for a person to both be successful and truly honest, because the political agent is one who's working on gaining and garnering your support. That's all he needs from you. A binary, I'm going to vote for that guy. So the most important thing, according to most candidates who think about these sort of things, is say stuff that gets them to vote for you. Don't say anything that might get them to not vote for you. I'm going to be reliant on the ability of the American people to hear and understand things longer than 30 seconds. I'm going to be reliant on the ability and skill of the American people at, even if they don't pay attention to what I'm saying, at recognizing that I am the only one putting the requisite energy and ideational vigor towards all aspects of what it means to be President of the United States. Not just the policy aspects, not just the ideology aspects, not just the principles aspects, not just the FE aspects, the how can I influence people or convince them, not just the polish and everything.
every aspect of it. Only one person has everything. Now, right now, I'm not displaying very presidentially in terms of backdrop and appearance. Kimberly has scolded me about this. I need to do that today. I need to finish cleaning up back here so that I have a proper backdrop, and I do plan to do that today. When I finish this live stream, I'll get on it. Regardless, once I put that piece into place, it will be easier for people who aren't engaged with me ideationally to nevertheless see me as a legitimate presidential candidate. Once I can get news media and other individual people to start affording me attention, even if it's as a curiosity, YouTube creator running for president or something like that, invariably, more people will hear more of my words. Any serious voter who engages with me will vote for me. Even if they think walking in, they're engaging with me to school me about my wrongness, they will lead that conversation as my supporter and my voter. And the reason I believe this to be the case is because I'm the only candidate who both will convince them that I'm concerned about their interests and will represent them without lying to them and telling them I'm going to support somebody I want to support. If you are pro-choice, I am not going to be arguing your side of things. I'm not going to be saying, here's why we need to preserve abortion rights. But that doesn't mean you need to vote for somebody else. Because I can assure you right now, the last thing I want to do is engage in behavior as a president that results in people being punished for abortions. So while I don't agree that abortions ought to be legal, I also have nowhere on my political agenda here for my presidency doing anything about abortion. It's not an actual priority for me. If a bill were to pass my desk, I will sign or not sign it accordingly to my belief that we ought not do things that encourage abortion. That abortion is morally impermissible because it's argumentationally indefensible. However, if you are pro-choice, understand that I am absolutely an advocate for egalitarianism, which means I am absolutely opposed to reducing anybody to a member of their group, which means I don't believe that women have a certain place or that you should blah, 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 or whatever. You're a person, first and foremost, as is any embryo inside of your body. So I am a big advocate for genuine equality between people. I'm a big opponent of misogyny. I am disgusted by sexual violence and rape culture and stuff like that. I don't like toxic expressions of masculinity at all. I never have. I've been opposed to such things since I was a boy. I positioned myself against the douchebags and the toxic masculinity people as early as age 12 and have been positioning myself in opposition to that ever since. And the reason is because I'm first and foremost an intuitive. I'm ideational. I want to engage with you as a human being who creates ideas and is concerned about correctness. That makes me a feminist. It doesn't mean I support your legislation that unavoidably causes way more problems than it solves. So if you're in favor of some sort of equal rights administration legislation, equal pay legislation, some sort of legislative solution to carve out protection, no, I'm opposed to legislating things for groups because there's no individual who's a member of that group, even though that group label may fit on those people. So if you want me to legislate bad law on behalf of your group, then I'm not on your side. If you want me to afford every individual member of your group real dignity as an individual human being, autonomous and not constrained to be limited to attributes of that group, then I'm on your side 1,000,000%. I'm opposed to individuals doing harm to each other for unjust reasons. That means non-responsive reasons. Am I in favor of equality for gays and lesbians and transgender people? Absolutely. Am I in favor of laws that prevent people from refusing to do business with such. I absolutely oppose such laws. Should the baker be able to make a cake? Should be able to refuse to make a cake for a gay couple? Absolutely. Should he be able to refuse to make a cake for a black couple? Yeah, absolutely. Because he's a private citizen. And any claim to the contrary is making an ownership claim on that person's conscience, making an ownership claim on that person's perception. I am not rendered criminal when I perceive things through a racist lens. I'm not rendered criminal when I perceive things through a misogynistic lens. I'm not rendered criminal when I hate gay people. Because my perceptions and my mental processes are my own. It is not appropriate then for the government to say, I know this is your business that you built with your own hands and effort, that you spent your own money on, that you own entirely, but I'm going to tell you who you can and can't do business with. This is not appropriate. Is it true that institutionalized racism or discrimination in housing or discrimination in the marketplace is a terrible thing? Yeah, if the discrimination is based on irrelevant factors like race or gender or age or stuff like that, it is a terrible thing. Is it true that legislation is not the means to address this? Yes, legislation is not the means to address this, because the only thing one thing that's definitely way worse than a business owner executing his ownership of that business to refuse to take profit from somebody because he doesn't like their group. The thing that's worse than that is somebody saying, I get to decide when your reason to exercise your own property rights is good enough or not. That's the more arrogant claim. And remember, government doesn't act. Individual human beings do. Government tells individual human beings when it's okay as an agent of the government for them to use coercion. The problem with laws against discrimination that apply to private businesses is some individual is saying, I am wise and clear enough in vision to determine when you perceive things correctly enough to utilize your own property rights. The individual who's saying that, be they a legislator passing a law or a cop using a law to justify the behavior or whatever, those are the people we need to worry about. Those are the ones making the most ridiculous claim. Those are the ones who are trying to steal from you your own autonomy. And that's the sort of behavior we need to stop. And that is going to represent the end of this live stream. I've gone off topic substantially, but in terms of the tax reform thing, but I've stayed on topic overall in bulk in the sense that I'm telling you about my policy plans, I'm telling you about my attitudes, and I'm telling you about what my principles are going to be. I'm explaining to you why I'm the best candidate for president. I'll be back again every day, live streaming or putting up videos about my policy plans. If you have any consideration that maybe, just maybe, you want to give idealism one more shot, donate to my campaign. I'm the only candidate who really represents idealism. Not socialism, not libertarianism, not conservatism, not liberalism, but genuine patriotic idealism. Vote for me. Thank you for watching. Damn it. There. Pew. Pew.